by modern standards, primitive. Among other Aborigines, extremely advanced. The Natchez Indians. Rare abilities. Bizarre customs. Eerie religious rites. With such a heritage, little wonder that the city taking that civilization's place is different. A friend of mine said the other day, you don't pass through Natchez going anywhere. You have to go to Natchez. Natchez has to be a destination. True, Natchez has been a destination for almost 500,000 people yearly. And no wonder. The whole town is an antique. It's where society as we know it began. From the squalor of Natchez under the hill to the grandeur of the mansions up in the bluff. Or as one citizen put it, Natchez proper was up there. Natchez improper was down here. For the next little while, I'll be your host as we see some of the reasons why Natchez and Adams County are a rarity. Now, so much we probably won't be able to see it all, but we'll see enough so that we can better understand the meaning of Natchez is different from any other place in the world. From the river, mudflats grew. Then came the village of Natchez, the section on the river known as Natchez under the hill. Natchez on the bluffs began its growth as more expensive mansions. In early years, this was the part of Natchez where keelboats, foreign ships, barges of all kinds, and river scows moored. Early Spanish rule kept it policed very well. After Spanish rule, motley crews anxious to break the monotony of months of confinement took advantage of the variety offered under the hill. Natchez under the hill, as a thriving river port, was sort of upstaged by a reputation for gaiety and bawdy living, its progress being measured by the number of weekly killings instead of the tons of shipping. Stories such as 2 men wrestled for a knife, both fell, one walked away. The other lay quivering with his bowels exposed. Since the victor was known, witnesses turned away lest they fall victim. Similar incidents caused lawlessness to grow. From upper story windows, prostitutes, robbers, gamblers, all who could benefit, eyed new arrivals at the wharf, hoping to add to their coffers. Signs everywhere hawked advantages. Natchez under the hill, though bigger then, still stands. No story of Natchez could possibly be told without showing you where some of the citizens who endowed Natchez with its popular historic backdrop lived. After all, where they lived is what you mainly want to see. Greek revival was popular during the 1800s, and one of the finest examples of it in the South is Devereux, finished in 1840. Back in 1835, the Alexander Moore estate, reputed to extend from Port Gibson to Baton Rouge. Oakland was a plantation house on that tract. Lewis Evans, an early sheriff of the Mississippi Territory, built Twin Oaks about 1812. In early America, it was expected that bankers lived behind their banks. And so in Natchez, this lovely banker's house. Tragedy aided in molding Natchez. Here at Hawthorne, the entire Thompson family was struck down by yellow fever in 1814. After its completion in 1855, Confederate General William T. Martin made this his home. Montaigne boasts of 350 varieties of camellias. At one time, Spain ruled this area. In defiance, Andrew Ellicott flew the United States flag from this hill. Soon this house was built on Ellicott's Hill. Most homes in Natchez were built for function. In 1845, John T. McMurrin spared no expense embellishing Melrose with the finest in every minute detail without regard to function. Uniquely tied to the river, but choosing to live among the more ornate homes on the bluff, one of the most famous captains ever to ply the Mississippi waters, Thomas P. Leathers, who owned the famous Natchez steamboat. For many years, Captain Leathers operated several steamers out of Natchez, while living at Myrtle Terrace, the front yard being enclosed with a still-standing elaborate iron fence. Across the street, the centerpiece of this part of the world, Stanton Hall, with its Greek Revival Corinthian-capped columns dominating a city block. Inside, elegance continues to unfold. A peek through the first room along its 72-foot hall hints of a style seen few other places. Probably immensity and spaciousness are the first feelings the mansion creates. The great parlor displays a matchless opulence, molded by selections from all over the world. A hand-carved arch overhead divides this room, making the rear section into a music room built around a 200-year-old Empire pianoforte. Uncommonly, a double music stand adorns Stanton Hall's music room. This majestic edifice has 5 levels. some furnished with pieces of the period appealing to the most discriminating. It's difficult to imagine that back in 1857, when Thomas Rose, the builder, submitted a final bill, these royal quarters cost a bit over $83,000. An Irishman from Belfast, Frederick Stanton adapted well to his chosen home, becoming one of the wealthiest men in the country. Enjoying his home only 9 months before his death, Frederick Stanton left the world a magnificent monument. While Stanton Hall may be one of the most famous homes, there are still many others open. It was once thought that spreading dirt caused yellow fever. Since most citizens yielded to any and all theories that might get rid of this deadly scourge, Cherokee was built on a hill without moving any dirt. One of the finest examples of Italianate style in architecture is found at Edgewood, also displaying a well-manicured lawn of tremendous proportions. One of Natchez' oldest, representing several periods, The Elms is near downtown Natchez. Another close to downtown, a home for 5 continuous generations, Greenleaves was built in 1812. Dunleith and Natchez are synonymous because its huge columns and unusual setting, being so close to a main thoroughfare, are seen by everyone who visits Natchez, especially photographers. Lansdowne was the first house in the Natchez territory to generate its own illuminating gas. A man passing through decided to stay and try building a fortune in Natchez. He was successful and built the Burn. To honor one of Natchez' most esteemed citizens, we begin at the state capitol in Jackson. In the Hall of Governors, a likeness of John Anthony Quitman, Mississippi's 10th governor, is displayed. This popular Natchezian's record relates outstanding performance in the Mexican War and one of the most successful tenures of any man to hold Mississippi's governor's office, even though he resigned the post. John Anthony Quitman enjoyed acclaim from enemies as well as from his friends. John Anthony Quitman lived in a home on tour in Natchez, Monmouth. Remembered by most as the man who killed Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr served as vice president of our fledgling country, losing the presidency to Thomas Jefferson by 1 vote. After the loss, Burr came to the Natchez area to stir up rebellion and regain fame, only to be indicted for his efforts under these oaks at the entrance to a national institution. Since 1802, Jefferson Military College. This school was established by an act of the Mississippi Territorial Legislature. A lot of years this college has been here. I figured it up. The flag-raising ceremony alone has taken place over 59,000 times. Natchez began as a small settlement on the bluffs, surrounded by many plantations, such as this Spanish governor's home, Hope Farm, still nurturing its old-fashioned gardens. Another plantation house, this one centering a well-kept lawn, Roofland, was erected around 1817. Auburn, with its freestanding stairway, was owned by Stephen Duncan, who donated many acres of land for recreational use. This land became Duncan Park. Auburn and Duncan Park are owned by the city of Natchez. A fine example of homes in the Spanish district, Tejada, reflects an illustrious past as a tavern, hotel, and legislative hall. Overlooking the mighty Mississippi, Evans Bontura is one of the few Creole-style houses in Natchez. One of Natchez's loveliest, the William Harris House, is often passed without notice, being on a busy thoroughfare. The last fine townhouse to be built before the Civil War, a spacious front yard is dominated by huge gingo trees. "1835 saw Ravenna completed by William Harris, whose wife Caroline was President William Henry Harrison's niece. At one time, this was among the most elegant of Natchez homes, then decline. That very decadence caused Glenwood, better known as Goat Castle, to become one of the most famous tourist attractions ever to grace Natchez. But wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Late one sultry August day in 1932, the events that took place here led the way for Glenwood to become prominent. It seems that Miss Jenny Merrill grew up at Elms Court across the way from her last home, called Glen Burnie. Fast friends and playmates to Jenny were Octavia Dockery and Dick Dana. Octavia and Dick collaborated in many artistic endeavors, and for a time were well known in the fields of poetry and music. Economic pressures caused them to neglect their home, Glenwood, just across a small hollow from Miss Jenny's Glen Burnie. As years slid by, misunderstandings grew. Then, that fateful day in August of 1932 witnessed Miss Jenny being taken down these steps to the woods between Glen Burnie and Glenwood. Accusations flew at Octavia and Dick, especially Dick. An intriguing tale of murder became overshadowed by the living quarters of Octavia and Dick. Where chickens, cats, and goats enjoyed the offerings of fine furniture, drapes, china, the entire household. Octavia became known as the Goat Woman. Dick, the Wild Man, though both later were proven to be innocent, and Glenwood, the once luxurious mansion, was called Goat Castle. Few other places in the world present such a variety of architecture as Natchez. Here's an early one, going all the way back to 1811. Mistletoe personifies livability and charm. Built on a Spanish land grant, Mount Repose is still owned by descendants of John Bisland, original grantee. Magnolia Hall was the last great mansion to be completed before Confederates fired on Fort Sumter. It's now a museum and headquarters of the Natchez Garden Club. Not far from the site of Fort Rosalie is the Greek Revival home, Rosalie, owned by the Mississippi Society of DAR. A story is told that Mr. Peter Little donated this lot for a preacher's home when the preachers came to visit a deeply religious Mrs. Little at Rosalie across the street. An end and a beginning. An oasis for the sweat-streaked trace traveler, a springboard for the tortuous trip up the Natchez Trace. King's Tavern, said to be the oldest house in the Natchez territory, boasted luxurious accommodations. Reluctance to proceed up the trace must have been increased by the view out these windows, or perhaps this could have been the first warm hearth seen in a long time by new arrivals from Nashville. Boatmen, settlers, farmers, merchants, sprinkled with a few robbers and murderers, a cross-section of a growing nation trod this primitive Indian path that was more of a direction to Nashville and Natchez than a roadway. At irregular intervals, inns were built along the trace where wayfarers could get better, not necessarily safer, accommodations and different, not necessarily better, food. A guest never knew what kind of stranger used the same room, or in many cases, the same bed. So the sleeping was light, or he might be robbed. History tells us that unless weather conditions were unusually severe, the traveler was better off sleeping out in the open. Generally, meals at the inn were often less tasty than meals prepared while traveling, the only advantage being they were cooked for you. Comparing notes with fellow travelers must have been some consolation and was probably the main attraction at the inn. Many times, exchanged experiences caused travelers to hesitate and wonder what lay ahead in the miles to come. Not far from Natchez stands Mount Locust, a replica of a typical inn or stand preserved by the National Park Service and open most days. Nearly 300 miles of memorial trace exists today, with stops along its way telling of early travel. Natchez was either a beginning or an end for the trace, was then and is now. Yesterday it looked like this. Today, only breezes through barren columns whisper of what a house looked like, built by a polite and polished William Dunbar. William Dunbar, of slight build, a most unlikely person to brave the hardships of a frontier, came to the Natchez area in the late 1700s and helped settle the place. From his beloved forest, the name he chose for his home and plantation, many contributions to agriculture were made. Starting at home, he mined and sent north a very important mineral of that day, ochre. Proceeds from that venture gave him the funds to experiment with and improve Eli Whitney's cotton gin. He was the first to envision pressing oil from cottonseed, adding value to a commodity that had been considered a nuisance. Those are just a few of the reasons that William Dunbar was adored as one of the most prominent citizens in the United States. The remains of the forest are just south of Natchez. Lucky for us, most homes are as they were in olden times. Here's one built in 3 stages. Richmond started in 1784 as a French villa. Then came the colonial period and changes were made. The final change came in 1860. Greek Revival architecture was popular then. Cotton was king, producing over half of Natchez's wealth, thus the plantation headquarters. This one, Fair Oaks, has been in the same family since 1856. Early plantation life around Natchez created Elgin. Massive porches were added later. Once the center of a huge plantation, Linden, the original portion made of pure cypress and pegged together instead of nailed together. Originally called Gardenia Cottage, remodeled in 1859 as an Italian Renaissance villa, and renamed the Towers. Its spire is as prominent as its chimes unusual. Since the mid-1800s, worshippers have heeded the call to Mass at St. Mary's. St. Mary's roots reach back to 1668, when first France, then Spain claimed the Natchez area. St. Mary's, the only structure in the state designed to be a cathedral. We would be terribly negligent forgetting the thousands who made Natchez the delightful Mecca it is and are no longer with us. Taking a chance on being called morbid by such an invitation, you ought to visit this place while in Natchez. Personalities that molded Natchez are buried here. Some you have read about, some known worldwide, and some you've never heard of until a visit to Natchez. The Natchez City Cemetery, one of the largest in this country. A bit farther north on the same road lies a national cemetery dating back to the Civil War. This national cemetery is under perpetual care by the U.S. government, and it symbolizes, in a way, the contribution this area has made to the defense of our country. When in Natchez, a drive-through is a must. It's open most of the daylight hours, every day. Personalities that we all have read about have influenced Natchez's past. Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, went to school at Jefferson Military College, and later he walked through these gates to wed Varina Howell, the lass who was known as Varina of the Magnolias. After a leisurely walk down any street in Natchez, it won't take long to realize why we call the whole place an antique. These building facades, as old as they are in use every day. Many times, residences are nestled among commercial endeavors. Regardless of location, most houses have been occupied all along, and during the spring, shrouded in blooms. Countless sidewalks are bordered with walls hiding many interesting places. Frequently, front doors opened onto the sidewalk. When these homes were built, it was popular to do such. A church flag was flown over this territory before any other banner. It's easy to understand why Natchez has always been motivated by deep religious convictions. Trinity Episcopal, for example, has been serving congregations since the early 1800s. Natchez warmly welcomes you and prepares for your stay, whether long or short, with tours designed according to the time you have. During the spring and fall pilgrimages, home tours are offered that have made Natchez the tourist center it is. Something new can be a challenge when it comes to finding the spot you want to see. The personnel at tour headquarters know Natchez and know what's interesting. Whether you came to our beloved Natchez for just a few hours or a few days, they're there to help you get the most of your time. Natchez is best known for its many mansions, but several days could be spent seeing and doing other things. Over 300 years of existence have produced countless attractions that you'll enjoy. At tour headquarters, they're prepared to advise on things to do and places to go. Natchez is enjoyable year-round. During spring pilgrimage, a satisfying experience is the Confederate pageant, offered many evenings and depicting in dance and song the evolution of Natchez. On the lighter side, the Natchez Little Theater performs Southern Exposure, a satire of genuine Natchez flavor. An ingredient making all these performances unique, both the pageant and Southern Exposure, is that the cast enjoys performing as much as the audience enjoys watching. As we keep reminding you, Natchez and Adams County are a wealthy reservoir of appealing things to do and see. So much so, we've probably left out some color that might interest you. More of a reason for you to want to come back. We've said over and over that Natchez is different. Well, if we haven't already proved it, this will. It's got to be one of the rarest artifacts in the world, longwood. Longwood was planted by Dr. Heller Nutt to be the palace among palaces. Work to accomplish this was going on nicely until the firing on Fort Sumter in 1860. Since most of the artisans were Northerners, they left their jobs to heed Lincoln's call. So, left in an unfinished state that only imagination can complete, is longwood. And its incomplete appearance will feed your imagination. Some of the most ornate scroll work to ever exist is found in longwood. Understand now why we say Natchez is different from any other place in the world. Every direction will entertain you because the whole area is an antique. Almost every step reveals a history like we've never studied before. Literally, an unusual story lurks around every corner. If you've been to Natchez, you know something of what we mean. If you've never been, you're in for a treat.